we're going to talk about tonight is two things that a lot of people have issues with, but feel like there's a stigma about because they feel like they're not good people, or they're not powerful enough, or they can't control themselves. And that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. What we're talking about is anxiety and depression, and there's an actual physical cause to why these things happen. And it's not that you're a weak person or not a powerful person, it's that your body is in a state of defense. So what we're going to get into, first off, is the kinds of brains that we have. And there's actually three kinds of brains. So we'll make this one the L and this one the R. So if we are a left brain dominant person, we're usually a male. Now that's right 80% of the time, because this is just sociologically how we are. If you're a right brain dominant person, what do you think you are?
Right is female.
Female, there we go.
A puppy.
A puppy, nice. So, male and female. Now this is right 80% of the time. So that means there's 20% of the females in the world that have a left brain, and 20% of the males in the world that have a right brain. So these are the males that are very emotional and very connected, and they really like bringing people together. That's what females like doing, is they like bringing things together, bringing and a lot of the feeling, a lot of community type things. That's that right brain dominance. And the left brain dominance is more linear thinking. So the female is better at grasping at many different things, bringing it together, and figuring out from there, where the male goes A equals B equals C, and if that doesn't go in that order, I don't know what you're talking about. Does that make sense? So that's very linear thinking, very specific, goal-oriented. These are two different things. So if we wanted to talk about it in physics terms, this would be more of a quantum physical brain, and this would be more of a Newtonian brain. Now what that means simplistically is that this is more of a mechanistic, and this is more of a, I can't even say mechanistic, or not Newtonian, but quantum, where it can be anywhere. So those are two ways of looking at the universe. That was me just going on a tangent. So when we look at this, the way your brain reacts to stress determines how your personality will be, how you deal with things. So if you're a very left brain dominant person, like myself, well, for a while I was, now I made it right, but anyways, I'll tell you guys how that works. If you're a very left brain dominant person, what happens is when you get stressed out, you want order, no chaos, and you want things to be done. And if they get done, you know you're done. So this is why when you deal with a man who comes home and he's stressed out, he wants his A and B, and then he's done. He wants his food and relaxation. And it's a little more than that as well, because here's the interesting thing. The brain dominance actually determines what relaxes you. So if you're a left brain dominant person, talking and thinking in linear fashions will actually make you more stressed out. So if you're a man and you come home at the end of the night and you've been stressed all day, you want to chill out and activate that right brain. And so what does that, or right brain, what does that look like in North America? You turn on the television, because the television will start stimulating that right brain so you chill out. Another way you can do it is have them color or do things like that, but that's kind of hard for a lot of guys to want to engage in. So that's why they don't feel good. Where here's the interesting thing. What does a female usually like to do if they're stressed out? Do they want to talk to a friend? Do they want to be listened to? Guess what that does? It stimulates the left brain. So if your right brain's overstimulated, and you talk and stimulate your left brain, you start balancing it out, and then you feel better. So when a guy's stressed out, if you want to talk to him, it's just going to make him worse. I'm done, and he walks away, because it's too much for him to deal with. Now if you had him write it out, it would actually work better. Does that make sense? So that's going to actually make that communication. So now you know how the stress brain works, or some of the symptoms are. What happens with it is this. Say you're the average female. You become very stressed out. What happens is when you become stressed out, you become more hemispherized or dominant with one way of thinking and being. So what does that do? You become right brain dominant. If you're a male, you become left brain dominant. Now these dominances determine what form of diseases and dysfunction you get. So is there any questions on that so far? Okay, so now we're going to look at different parts of the brain. So if we look at the brain like this, oh, that's really bad. That's a brain looking down from the top. I know it's really bad looking, but it's okay. So we'll make this one the right and this one the left. Now we're going to look at the brain from the side. So the brain comes up and goes all the way around, comes back down. It looks kind of like a mushroom. And this right here is the frontal cortex. What that means simplistically is that's the executive center of your brain. That's the part of your brain that separates us from the apes, makes us be able to think higher levels, all that stuff. Make sense? Now we're going to get into those different dysfunctions that we have. But before I get there, we're going to talk about specific brain waves. So there's 4 brain waves that are the easiest to talk about. There's 2 outliers. We don't really need to talk about them because they're not where we're usually hanging out at. They happen like 1% of the time. So the 4 brain waves that we're going to talk about are, we'll make it up high here. Beta. And beta is a brain wave where high energy consumption is used and very engaged. You're going to be extremely, extremely engaged. If you have too much beta, but it's a specific form of beta, it's beta above 22 hertz. So it's beta between 22 to 40 hertz. That's stress beta. So what that means simplistically, this is when you're so stressed out that you ruminate on things and you won't let it go and it keeps going over and over and over. And I'm sure we've never had that, right?
Nope.
Nobody's ever had that before.
Nope.
That's the bad beta. Below that, we have a brainwave called alpha. Now, alpha here is conscious relaxation. If you've ever played any sports or played a trumpet or had one of those days where you just meditate and you chill out and everything's good, that's alpha, where you're awake, but everything is easy. You feel yourself just relax. It's called conscious relaxation. Now, the frequency for alpha is 7.8 to 15 hertz. Now, below alpha is theta. Theta is it's conceptual development, but it's where you're almost asleep. You're in like a dreamy kind of world. You ever had those days where you just wake up and you're like, I'm groggy, what's going on? That kind of stuff, that's being in too much of a theta state. We really don't need to get into that frequency as much, but if I look at it, it's like 3.5 to 7.8 hertz. And then the last one's delta, and that's when you're deep sleep, you're out. So we really don't need to talk about delta because you're not awake. Make sense?
What was the sun tanning?
The sun tanning relaxed one,
Yeah,
that is alpha.
alpha.
That's alpha, that's that chill, relaxed state. You're in that perfect zone. You know, you ever sat on a bench and you're like, this is perfect, and time just starts disappearing? That's alpha. That's that beautiful state. Now, these 2 right here we're not really going to talk about today. We can get back into it later. But this one, the beta culprit. Guess what happens with this one? Do you think if you're stressed out, you have more of that or less of that? More of it, right? So what happens here is this. Depending on which brain you are, say you're an average female, and you get really stressed out because damn husband did something or da-da-da-da or something happened. Something bad happened or a bad drive to work or something like that. What'll happen is your right brain at the frontal cortex will become stimulated. When you stimulate it too much and it stays in this high frequency for too long of a time frame, which is more than an hour or 2, your brain actually starts learning to stay in that frequency. And when it stays in that hyper energetic frequency, guess what that turns into? Depression. high beta in the right brain for a long period of time causes depression. Neurofeedback and neurospecialists have known this for years, roughly 50 years. Now the other thing that happens though, say you're the person that goes into the left brain, and you start with a left brain issue. You're that male-dominated brain. When you get really high frequency and it keeps firing over and over and over and over and over and over again, you get anxiety. This is why males dominantly have anxiety and females dominantly have depression. Now what happens is, if this right brain gets stuck in depression for too long, it'll actually try to use the left brain to take over, and now you'll have depression and anxiety. And the males will do the same. Then they'll go from anxiety to depression. And it's all a brain frequency. So what we do is, if we can change the way your nerves actually fire and take you out of that frequency, it goes away. And you don't need a chemical to do it. Now what they've used is they use antidepressants. And what it is a way to stop your brain from firing that quickly, because you actually burn out the way the nerves communicate, and then you can't have that feeling anymore. So you burn the nerve out. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at how basic nerves work. So we got the body of the nerve, and then it comes out, and it's got this little head thingy, and then it comes all the way back. Oh, interesting fact, every single muscle in the body only has 2 nerves communicating to it. That means every single muscle. That means your little toe has one big nerve that goes all the way up here, connects here, and the next one goes to the brain. Every single part of your body only has 2 nerves communicating to it. So this long thing is really long. So we got that, the soma of the body, all that. You don't need to know any of that stuff. Now, here's how this works. There's another nerve right here, and the little neurotransmitters have to go between it to make the next nerve come up and fire. And let's say this is your brain here. Does that make sense? Now, how the drugs work, I'm talking about SSRIs specifically, is there's little tiny neurotransmitters, and they're made in the body of the cell right here. And what they do is they run down the cell, and then when your cell gets stimulated, you think of something, it pushes it out, it goes across here, goes in here, and then that stimulates it to go again. Does that make sense? So little neurotransmitters that are made here go across, stimulate, and keep going. Now what you do with these SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, is you stop all the little transmitters from being able to get out of here, and you keep causing it to fire. And then as a byproduct, this is the same as this. You use up all of these. And then it can barely produce enough chemical to make it fire anymore. And then it will only fire at a certain frequency. So all of that thing I'm explaining is to slow the nerve firing down. And that's how the drug works. But the problem with this is say you want to get off of it, then your body's used to making so much of this neurotransmitter, then when you start getting off of it, it won't burn out as quickly, and then you start getting anxiety and all these different things, because that brain frequency starts firing again where it's been at before. That make sense? So what we need to do is, yes, you can do it chemically, but the problem with that is you've altered the brain cells forever. They'll go back eventually, but it takes time because now you've changed the physiology. So the easier way to do it is to do what's called neurofeedback. And what that means is you take the brain, you find out what part isn't communicating correctly, and then what you do is you put a little probe wherever you want to change it. Now specifically what causes anxiety and depression is the frontal cortex. So that means the front of your brain. So what you do is you take a probe, and if say you have anxiety, you're the common male, you put the probe on the top of the brain right here, and then you train the brain to fire an alpha or theta, because that's a slower frequency. And that frequency, it's impossible to produce anxiety. Say you want to get rid of depression, then you do it on the other side, and you train the brain to go slower. And then you go, well, what do you mean by training? How does that work? How it works? Great question. I'm glad you guys fast.
You're welcome.
How that works is you use what's called a Pavlovian or a physiological response. So how this works is, have you ever heard of Pavlov's dogs and what he did? So they were given food and he rang a bell. And each time he gave them food and he rang the bell. Eventually he stopped giving them food and rang the bell and they kept drooling, right? So what we do is your brain always wants to produce and get a good response. So it really likes stimuli. So it likes movement and sound. So what happens is we train the machine so that whenever your brain fires at an alpha frequency, and this is basic neurofeedback here, it will cause a movement on the screen and a noise to be made. And your brain goes, excellent, let's keep doing that. And when it does that, that's when the nerves are communicating correctly at the right speed. Then when it doesn't do it, it turns it off. And then you do it again, right? And you go, ooh, and you hear stuff, and it goes, excellent, we did it again. And you keep doing that, and what happens is the nerve learns that I'm supposed to fire at a slower frequency, and then it stays that way forever. It'll keep firing at that exact frequency. Because that's the way it's learned to do it, and the physiology has trained it to stay that way, and it fires that way. So what that means simplistically is, we slow the way the nerves fire down, and that subluxation or inability for the brain to communicate correctly goes away, and now your anxiety and depression is gone. And it stays that way forever. Or until you decide to push your body into such a stress state again that the stress trains your brain to go back into this frequency. But if you train it to stay that way, it's very easy for that way to stay that way. So you basically train it to fire at that right frequency, and it will stay that way forever, unless you have a very severe stressful environment. Does that make sense? So, that was a lot of words for saying, make the front of the brain fire slower, or go boom, 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 instead of do, and then anxiety and depression goes away. Do you guys have any questions? No? Does that make sense? Yeah? Awesome. So, and here's the really, really, really cool thing. And this is why I love doing what I love to do, which is to be a chiropractor. Because here's what chiropractors have found out in the last 20 years. That guess what the chiropractic adjustment does? The adjustment is so powerful that it literally takes your brain and makes it fire 2 to 3 times more of this frequency, and it turns this frequency almost off. This is why people get addicted to the chiropractic adjustment, because it literally changes your brain frequency and chemistry. It calms you down instantly. There is no other modality or substance that you can take that within a millisecond can change your brain this quickly. This is why for years chiropractors have talked about, we adjust you and then we watch things like diabetes go away, or we watch things like anxiety go away, or infertility or digestive issues and all these things. And the thing is, if you look at it mechanistically like a medical doctor does, then it doesn't make sense. Because they're looking at it and saying, well, how can you pushing on the back have anything to do with the person's nerve that goes to the bowel? Or how can it have anything to do with the person's anxiety? How can it have anything to do with that? And it's because they weren't looking at the fact that when you stimulate the brain through an adjustment, it changes the frequencies of the frontal cortex and of the different brain centers. And in changing the frequency, the body will heal. It's freaking cool. So what it means simplistically is we change your brain and how it works. This is why we see people, when they get adjusted, they get better grades in school. Their IQs go up. They have more relaxation. They get rid of disease processes. All these things happen. You go, well, this just sounds like it's too good to be true. The only thing that will stop you from getting healthy is if you continually reactivate stress. If we can train you to stay there for a long enough time frame, I've literally seen every disease go away. And I'm not lying here. I'm talking about big things. MS, ALS, cancer, diabetes. And I never claim that I get rid of it. I only claim that if I can help you change the brain, your body will heal itself. Does that make sense? So my goal is to get your brain to get into that happy frequency. And when it's there, then you have a happy body and you heal yourselves. of literally all these big issues. This is why we also can see people come in and they're like, well, I started care and now I have one lady in here who's actually lost half the size that she was. She went from a 12 to a 6. And it was because with taking her out of stress, guess what goes down? The stress hormones, which are insulin and cortisone. Guess what those do? Make your tummy get big, make all the places you gain fat get big. So when you lower those hormones, your body loses the weight because you don't have that stress driving you to eat to get the sugar and then take in the insulin to pull it back in, and you're continually in this stress state. So the takeaway is this, is the adjustment is not a physical change. The adjustment is a neurological change to the brain to make the frequency work correctly, and then your body heals itself. Do you guys have any questions?